Yeah, thank you again for being here. And I believe your encounter took place out there in Ohio, and it was you and your cousin were fishing, is my understanding. If you would you kind of just start from the beginning and just walk us into what happened?
It was October 6th, nice bright sunny day. We was doing some bass fishing, me and my cousin. I just looked at my phone, and it was 10 till 5, and a rock landed right in front of the boat. And I yelled at my cousin thinking he made the noise, and he was yelling at me thinking I did it. We didn't know it was a rock at the time. And as we're talking, out of the corner of my eye, I see another rock coming. It's probably about the size of a bowling ball. And I didn't never put two and two together, never thinking it was anything other than a person. And it hit the water, and I looked where I seen it coming from and never seen anything. And my cousin seen a flash go behind a tree. It just stood there for a second, looking real mean at us, and it reached its right arm out and wrapped it around the tree. And it was probably 3 or 4 feet away from the tree, and it was still able to reach its arm all the way around the tree. And it was straight out. And I'm scared to death. I peed all over myself at that time, literally. And just then, it in a blink of an eye, it charged us, and I was bracing for the impact, and I just knew it was going to rip our heads off, and it made a hard left and was gone. I'm stunned and in shock and don't know what's up, and I'm still like just frozen in terror. I can't move, I can't scream, I can't do nothing. And I turn around and my cousin's in the water, and he's like moaning and everything. And I didn't even know it hit him, but it when it went by, it pushed him, hit him something. It couldn't have like hit him hard as big as that thing was. It broke 4 of his ribs, and it punctured his lung, and I had no idea that it did it. And he's trying to catch his breath and everything, and I'm like finally getting my crap together a little bit and try to help him out of the water, and he's gurgling and can't breathe, and I drag him up to the boat, and I'm just terrified, and I'm standing there. Like I get his arms, both his arms and his head's in the boat. It's up on my dry land, and only the ass end of it's sticking in the water. And then a log come flying, hit him right in the chin. A pretty good sized log, and it hit a tree first before it hit him. And it sounded like a gun going off. It hit that tree so hard. And it glanced off of it and just hit him in the chin and cut it real good. It gave him 16 stitches or 17 stitches or staples. Hang on a second.
No, you're doing fine, man. I know it's hard for you to recount it. Can you describe for the audience what you saw? You know, a lot of people haven't seen these things, and so in your own words, can you tell us what you guys actually ran into?
A monster. A monster. I don't know exactly how tall it was. If it was an inch, it was 8 to 9 foot tall. It was 3-4 foot wide. It was closer to 4 foot, no, without exaggerating. It reminded me of a piece of plywood. It was just so huge, and its eyes were big and black. I hated to look at its face, man. It was the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my life, honestly. But not just ugly, but scary. I mean, just scary. And there was nothing kind about this animal here. There was no kindness in it. I've heard other shows and other stories, and this was not a creature that wanted to have coffee with me or anything. It wanted to kill us, and I don't know why. I don't know what we did to make it mad. We was being quiet, flipping up towards the bank, bass fishing, and evidently it didn't like us being there.
Would you say it looked more human-like? Would you say it looked more like a primate, like a non-human primate?
There was nothing human about this thing. The only human thing about it was the way it stood.
All right. Well, I was a newer truck driver, and it was my first solo load. I picked up some potatoes outside of Pocatello, in Idaho, and had to get them out to Portland. So I had plenty of time on my load. You know, it was a really nice day. There's a couple of passes that you have to go through that are pretty tricky, you know, to get down into the flatlands in Oregon off the 84. So I decided to pull over. It was around 5:30, 6 o'clock. I pulled over at it was more like a brake check station, not really a rest area, just off to the right side of the road. And there was another truck there at one end, and I pulled towards the exit so I'd have an easy off. And there was a dumpster there and some recycle. And anyway, like I said, it was around September, late September, early October. So the days were still really warm, but it got cooler at night. And the truck I have, when the temperature drops below 70 degrees, it'll automatically cut off if you leave it idling. But I went to bed with it on. You know, I had my coffee, everything like that. I was excited to start the day tomorrow, my first drop. So I crashed out at around 7. And I get up around 3 o'clock, before 3, because I woke up before my alarm. And, you know, I lit a cigarette, poured some coffee into opened my thermos, and I hop out to take a leak. And I catch movement by the dumpster. And this thing, it looked tawny at first, and it was down low, just rose up and came around the dumpster and just stood there staring at me. It was just there. And I just froze. We locked eyes, and he was just there. Everything, you know, I've heard of these. I've always been a fan of Bigfoot. I've always believed in the legend, but that was the farthest thing I ever thought would ever happen to me in my life. I was just horrified, terrified.
Yeah, I can imagine. So was he right in front of the truck looking up at you?
Yes, like within 5 feet from the front of my truck, just right on the other side of that dumpster, because I was parallel to the dumpster. The dumpster was off to the right of me. And my truck had quit running, and I had my parking lights and my running lights, so I could see this thing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, for the audience, can you describe what you saw?
Ugly, huge. The way it stood up, it was standing kind of at an angle with his right side to me and his left off towards the tree line, and he just kind of swayed. Like I told you yesterday, it looked like he had something wrong with him, like his arm. His right hand was kind of cupped and curled in, and he just swayed his head, staring at me, and he looked pissed, like absolute disdain. I can't even describe it. I can't in the feeling I had. I mean, my whole body went ice cold, and I thought I was done peeing, but I proceeded to do so again in my pants.
Yeah, and that definitely happens when people run into them. When you saw it, did it look more human in the face, or did it look more like a gorilla or chimpanzee, or how would you describe the face?
The face was, I've listened to a couple of shows, and when you've heard people say it looked almost aboriginal, that's pretty damn accurate. In the face, the forehead was really short and was conical, was kind of coned up. Wasn't that big up top, but the face was huge. The jaw was huge. Had a flat nose, kind of like ours, but like it's been mashed in, and really broad, really flared out, broad nostrils. And I guess it's hard to describe something that like that. I don't have words. The distance from the nose to the upper lip was longer than from the lip to the chin, and it had a hairline. It was so close I could see pine needles and leaves and shit in its hair. And it just stood there staring at me, swaying, making weird faces at me. Like I told you that if a human was to make this face, it would look like they were going, you know, it would like purse its lips out and growl the whole way and bare its teeth. Like I said, I can't describe it. Yeah. It's like something right out of a horror movie.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and I understand exactly what you mean when you say that, because I can relate, and it's like, I always tell people, when you see it, you almost don't believe it. It almost looks fake when you see it. I mean, it's so real, it almost looks fake. But I would imagine, and that's a pretty desolate area you're in Oregon. I mean, you're on your own out there. No one's coming to help you in that general area of where you're at.
There was absolutely nothing I could do. Nothing.
And so what happens next? He's looking at you. You're looking at him. And
it's snarling and growling at me. Well, next step, we're just locked eyes. Mind you, this whole thing probably took about 10 to 15 seconds. And to the left, there was another one come out. And I told you it looked like she had something in her. She had breasts. Looked like she had dead coyotes or something. It was more than one. Small animals in her ear.
Did she look at you? Did she stop and look at you, or did she just... So she comes out. Didn't even acknowledge me. Didn't so much as glance at me. So I'm wondering, like I said, like I told you yesterday, and that's the part that still terrifies me to this day, why I won't go to rest areas.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Wes. Thank you.
And if you would, before we jump into your encounter, I wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit about it prior to coming on the show. What was your take on Sasquatch?
I guess I never really thought about it. If somebody would have asked me about Sasquatch or Bigfoot, I would have kind of laughed at them, to be honest with you. You know, with the way I am, I guess I got to see something to believe it, and I sure as hell did. So, but prior to, yeah, I would have never believed in anything like that.
And I know this happened in Florida. We don't have to go into too many details about where it happened in Florida. But if you would, for the audience, just walk them right into the encounter. Tell us what you're out doing, and then if you would, just walk us right into what happened.
Okay, so I guess it's been Sunday it'll be 4 weeks now, but I had an upcoming redfish tournament. When I go out to scout for schools of fish, I usually take my kayak so my motor doesn't scare them, basically. So this particular morning, I got up about 4 a.m., got on the boat ramp and dropped my kayak in the water. Had to paddle for about 45 minutes. On the way out there, typically, we'll see schools of bait fish or just different things. You can hear different things, cicadas, birds, whatever. This morning, it was, as I stated, it was church quiet. I mean, it was weird. As I got to my spot, or I was coming up into my spot, I got to go behind two of these little spoil islands. Out of nowhere, this huge splash behind me occurred, and it literally scared the heck out of me. And we have fish down here called mullet bait fish that jump around and stuff like that, but it was a lot bigger. However, we do have manatees, and the manatees are plentiful in this area. And I thought, well, maybe I, spooked a manatee or something. It was just, the splash just came out of nowhere. It was pitch black. There's no lights from the city. There's really nothing. There's 2 radio towers at NASA that kind of light up a little bit of the water, but that's about it. I didn't think much of it after that. You're gonna have to excuse me here because I'm getting that chill again.
You're good. Take your time.
I continued to paddle on, and it just, like I said, everything just seemed different, quiet. I felt like I was being watched. Or that feeling where your hair stands up on the back of your neck. And well, the fish that I fish for, the redfish, they tend to school up and they run up and down the banks looking for shrimp and crustaceans and such. So I get behind the island, and I'm right against the shoreline, probably 20 feet off. I hooked the fish. Everything was good. Light was coming up. Completely forgot about what I had felt earlier about the splash and such. And once I got into this fish, I got to the side of the boat, and as I was taking the spoon out of its mouth, this smell. And when I say smell, it was the most horrifying, horrific, disgusting. There's no words that can describe this smell. As I got that smell, I decided I was just going to get the heck out of there. And I probably took 3 or 4 paddle strokes, and I jumped a bunch of pigs. I say I jumped them, meaning my paddle hit the water, and these pigs started running, wild hogs, making this commotion that just, excuse me once again, they, running down the bank, the shoreline, the water, just trying to get away from me is what I thought. And as soon as they took off running, this scream came from nowhere. And when I say scream, once again, I don't know how to describe it in words. It was the most horrific. I want to say it's we have Florida panthers, and I've actually heard one snarl or whatever you call it. But it was almost like a snarl like that, but with a deep growl that shook my insides to the point that I was, shaking sick. And these trees, these palm fronds and these trees were just shaking like crazy. And when I say I'm 20 feet off the shoreline, this was maybe not even 10 feet, if 10 feet, onto the shore. These trees and everything was just shaking like crazy. Honestly, I have no recollection of what happened really after that moment, other than I'm sitting there staring at these trees shaking, and I remember seeing this palm frond. And like I said, this happened, 4 weeks ago Sunday. So I'm trying to, still gather all my thoughts about this, because trust me, I don't want to believe this actually happened to me, but this face came from behind this palm frond and sat there and stared at me for probably 30 seconds. It just continued. The look on its face, I can't tell you. And then with the shaking of the trees and everything else, out of nowhere, this thing charged or ran towards me or the water, or I don't know if there may have been a pig in between us. I'm pretty sure I would have seen a wild hog, from 20 feet away. But it ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. It startled me so much. I have a sit-on-top kayak with a high seat, a raised seat, 11-inch seat, that it stunned me where I fell off the back of my kayak. I laid in the water because I honestly had no idea what to do. This thing stopped probably 3 feet in the water, which would have taken it, I would say, maybe 15 feet from me, if that. And I raised my paddle, like I was talking to you earlier, going through survival school in the Coast Guard and all that. You have that fight or flight, and typically you fight, but in this case, I couldn't. I was frozen with fear. The only thing I could think of was basically, holding my paddle up. I remember guys telling me, I'm not a hunter or nothing like that, but they say if you ever come across a bear, make yourself look as big as possible. I held my paddle up in the air, and I'm screaming at this thing, go away, bear, go away. And it stopped. It just completely stopped right there in front of me, stared at me for a second, and then walked away, or turned around and walked back towards the woods. As it walked away, it turned and stared at me again, and this look of, I just want to kill you. But it didn't. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't. It had, all the I don't want to say characteristics, but all the emotions of being human, and but it wasn't.
Well, no problem, Wes. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here, man. I'm really excited to talk with you. If you would you kind of start from the very beginning and walk us into this encounter?
All right, so I live in Virginia, but I was in Wyoming for about a week and a half because my grandmother, who's about 97 now, lived out there in Landau, Wyoming by herself. And me, my stepmother, my cousin were out there trying to move her stuff, like move her back to Virginia because she couldn't live by herself anymore. And we were out there for about a week and a half. And we get there, and one thing about me is I love animals, like dogs, cats. I've seen bears, like elk, moose, deer, just any animal you can think of that doesn't live in Africa. But I've seen so many animals. I just love just being out in the wilderness. I'm always in the forest. And we got there, and she was in a very small house, one story. So my cousin, my stepmom didn't really need my help really throughout the week. And in my grandmother's garage, she had not like an old bike, just like a regular mountain bike. And there's bike trails around Lander leading up to Shoshone National Forest. And every day I would just go out and just ride. Like I would leave the house at like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, and wouldn't come back till about 7 p.m. I'd just be out just enjoying the forest by myself. And this one particular day, something just didn't seem right. I mean, I always got this feeling being out there that someone was watching me. Always had that feeling, but this was back in 2010. I was about 11 years old at the time, and I wasn't knowing what I know now about Sasquatch. I didn't even come close to thinking about it at the time. So this one particular day, I'm riding, and I keep 2 water bottles on the bike, one on the front by the handlebars and one under my seat. And this one day I'm riding, and just the forest just seemed, dead. Like I didn't hear birds chirping like I normally do. And I only saw like one deer that day. It just felt like an off day. Off to my right, not like to my right, but like in front of me to the right, like northeast of me, I'm on the trail, and I hear like something coming through the forest. I first thought, okay, maybe it's deer, but then it starts getting closer, and like I've heard bears before, but it didn't sound like a bear, because bears, you could tell that this thing was on 2 feet. It was like a thud, just walking through the forest. So I'm thinking, okay, who's walking through the forest? And plus, they weren't just like regular footsteps; they're like heavy footfalls coming from the brush. And this thing steps out, and God, it was just massive. I mean, my first thought, okay, and it steps out on the trail, and it wasn't looking at me. It was kind of like facing the way it was going. And my second thought was, okay, what's a guy in a gorilla suit doing out here in the forest? That just doesn't make any sense to me. And mind you, I'm 11 years old, so I'm thinking this in my head, but I'm not like processing it yet. And I'm just looking at it, and it wasn't what I would expect to be in the forest. I mean, and I was about 35 yards away from it. So I can clearly see what it is. And it had just black matted hair just all over it. But it didn't have like hair over its face, on its face. And like I could clearly see like the facial details, like deep brow ridges. Its eyes were just black, and its nose, I mean, it had a human nose, but it wasn't like ours. It was like just like wider, like just a lot wider than ours. Its lips, its mouth was just huge. Like just see how wide its mouth was, and like it didn't have like human lips, but like it had thin lips, but like you couldn't really tell if it had lips or not because they were that thin. And I'm just looking at this thing. I'm just like, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I slowly started turning my bike around. And once I start moving, the one in front of me starts growling. And this growl, it wasn't like a roar, but it was like, one of those like, you don't need to be here, you need to get out of here now type of growls. I could feel the growl in my chest. Like it was very guttural. It was crazy. At that point, I'm trying to move a little bit faster, get on my bike.